Good evening. I'm David Lair, the president of Community Advocates. I'm a little lonely here tonight because my usual partner and colleague, Janice Kamener-Resnick of Jews United for Democracy and Justice, is out of town. I welcome you on her behalf and on behalf of our leadership team, Mel Levine, Zev Yaroslavsky, Caroline Kelly, Rabbi Ken Chase, and Janice, and our co-sponsors whose names you saw on the screen over the past couple of minutes. This is the 70th consecutive week of our America to Crossroads virtual town halls, nearly a year and a half of weekly programs on issues that are front and center on America's agenda. As exciting as our past speakers have been, we have equally impressive guests coming in the coming weeks and months. Next Thursday evening, not Wednesday, but Thursday, because of the Jewish New Year Rosh Hashanah, we'll welcome Ambassador Dennis Ross, one of the most experienced diplomats in recent American State Department history. He was ambassador at large to the Middle East, negotiated multiple contracts and not deals, but the negotiations between the Israelis and its Arab neighbors. He wrote a wonderful piece this past Monday in the New York Times, among the most analytical about what the impact of our withdrawal from Afghanistan means. He'll be discussing Afghanistan and its implications going forward. The next live program will be in 3 weeks. We'll be dark on after Dennis Ross. It'll be 2 weeks after the September 15th, when we will be dark because of Yom Kippur. And one of our favorite guests, David Frum of The Atlantic, will be with us in dialogue with KCRW's Madeline Brand. The following week, we will host the Washington Post's prolific and insightful op-ed columnist, Jennifer Rubin, in discussion with Pat Morrison. They will talk about Jennifer's new book, Resistance: How American Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. And as we enter the fall, we will also have another headline maker, Senator Joe Manchin, who will be with us in early October. On behalf of all of us associated with America to Crossroads, I extend our warm wishes for a happy, healthy, and peaceful New Year to all of our Jewish viewers. And tonight's moderator is Warren Olney, our most frequent host and the recipient of dozens of honors for his years in broadcast journalism, all well-deserved. Warren, please take it away.
Well, David, thank you very much for those kind remarks, as well as just introducing me, giving me a chance to be here tonight. And let me say to you in the audience, first of all, welcome. And I'm holding up my iPhone because I will be getting your questions on the iPhone a little later in the program, so I can relay them to our guest. Every White House produces characters in the American drama, but the Trump White House was Shakespearean. That is the term that was used by Michael Bender when I talked to him about his book. Frankly, we did win this election, the story of how Trump lost. Michael has a long, distinguished journalistic history. He spent the last 5 years covering the Trump White House and both presidential campaigns for the Wall Street Journal. He is no doubt much relieved at this point. And Michael, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Help me with these Shakespearean characters that we've got here. Not only do we have Trump, but we have the Trump family. We've got Jared and Ivanka and Don Jr. and all of them. And we've got Rudy Giuliani and Steve Bannon, Roger Stone and Bill Barr and Stephen Miller and Kellyanne Conway and General Milley, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, these are people who are well known now to the public, and not a situation that exists after most presidencies. You spoke to 150 people. You quote many at length and in detail, and not necessarily to their advantage. And you sort of make the reader a fly on the wall. How did you get them to talk to you?
Well, I've been around for a little while in Trump in Trump world here. I covered Trump since the start of the 2015 campaign, really. And while there is a lot of turnover in Trump world that we all know, the sort of dirty secret here is that it's more of a revolving door. You're never really banished in Trump world. It's just a matter of time before you kind of come back in the picture. And so I put in a lot of time. I wrote 1,100 stories at the Wall Street Journal that mention Donald Trump in them. So I was very aware of that heading into the book. I wasn't all that interested in reading another Trump story. We've all, very familiar with the story of Trump and the Trumpian chaos, whether you're covering it every day from the White House and for the Wall Street Journal, or seeing it on your cable screens in the Midwest, or you're watching the headlines come across your phone out on the West Coast. The thing that surprised me about this reporting was just how dangerous the people around him, a lot of the people around him, thought he was in that final stretch. I got to know this is my first book. I got to know some of these folks in a lot deeper way than I did covering the White House for in a daily sense on the newspaper. I spent several months after the election re-reporting what happened in 2020. And I think, you listed off the cast of characters there, and they are characters. I would say, General Milley, I don't know that he was there. I would say this book, it really is the book that put him on in front of a national political audience for the first time. He was very quiet and reserved and kept to himself during the administration. But it turned out that's because, in large part, he had his hands full, dealing with some of the requests that he was getting from President Trump.
You say that a lot of his people thought that Donald Trump was dangerous. Mm-hmm. Who thought he was dangerous, and what did they say? How did they say it?
Well, I mean, there was his own Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. This book reports for the first time that in the final days of the administration, Pompeo was concerned, expressed some concern to others in the administration that Trump might lean into a foreign conflict in order to buttress his argument to remain in office. Pompeo had started daily calls with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, with Mark Milley, the top general in the U.S. military, in order to keep tabs on that, to make sure temperatures were low or steady at least, and there were no curveballs coming that they all couldn't be aware of. This was the scenes in this book for the first time reported that Trump wanted to shoot Americans. That's not a hyperbole, Warren. That's, multiple times he told his top military and national security officials that he wanted the protesters who were protesting police brutality and civil justice abuses, that they should be shot. They should be shot in the arm, or shot in the legs or the foot, or have their skulls cracked. This is the sort of rhetoric that was coming from the president of the United States behind closed doors that we didn't, to a level we didn't see and know in real time.
I just want to go back briefly to the strategy that you used in order to get people to say these kinds of things, because no doubt that Donald Trump didn't want to read that. And a lot of them said things about each other that no doubt the others didn't want to read. And they were there, as I said, there were things that are about, people said that were not complimentary to themselves. But what I understand is that you actually went and talked to them all and told them that you would show them what you were going to print, and that they could comment on it in one way or another. You didn't say you take it out, but you said you'd show it to them. And you developed confidence in that way. That's pretty unusual.
So I didn't show anybody anything, but I did read parts back to them. Anytime someone was mentioned, anytime I heard about someone being in a room for a meeting or participating with conversation from someone else's recollection, I made sure that those people knew that they were being mentioned, that they were maybe quoted, and to see if it was accurate, to see if they had anything to add or refine, that sort of thing. I've been a newspaper reporter for 20 years. I've worked in 3 states, Ohio, Colorado, and Florida, all by chance political battlegrounds. I think I've earned a reputation from my sources and in Trump world for being swinging a pretty fair bat. And I didn't want to jeopardize any of that in this project. So while I do lean in, I think I do make some judgment calls here and, try to recreate some scenes. Nothing in the book is single sourced. Everybody had the chance to respond, and I made changes and kept things out based on the feedback I got.
In the introduction, you say that if they didn't tell their story, somebody else would.
Yeah, I mean, this is a key thing, a key dynamic in Trump world. Trump came of age in the New York City tabloid culture, right, where you sort of survive, if not thrive, by trading dirt on, your allies as well as your enemies in order to burnish your own reputation in the back pages there, and very negative headlines about yourself. And that's how that's how the business operated to a large degree in New York for the president, and that's certainly how this White House operated. There were no clear lanes for people underneath Trump, and everyone was sort of had free reign to sort of prove your loyalty and your allegiance to Trump, even if that meant taking out other people in the building.
So the source then of the antagonism that occurred, and then clearly there was enormous antagonism between the various people on the staff, was to some extent the result of Trump?
Oh, I think he's the cause of it. I mean, he's the sort of sun in the solar system. I mean, none of these things happened without his blessing or his certainly his encouragement in a cultural kind of way, right? I mean, I haven't, everyone I've covered, whether it be county commissions or school boards or state legislatures, the principal always sets the tone there, whether it's the governor or to his staff. State legislature, same way. Businesses, right, same way. Chief executives, and we're sort of all people sort of take their cues and from the boss, and that was certainly the case with Trump. I mean, he didn't want silos, right? He wanted all of that information to funnel down to him, big things or small. And it worked in some very brilliant ways. He became president of the United States, and it backfired in some monumental ways, whether it's management of the COVID or the George Floyd situation, or his own reelection campaign.
His diatribes and his attacks on the people who worked for him, even when he wanted them to stay, can you give us a sense of just how vitriolic they were?
Yeah, in the last month or so. Or
well, was it only in the last months, or was it throughout his presidency?
Oh yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, that last month was the culmination of what he'd been promising all of us for 4 years or more, right? I mean, he had told us for years that he could never lose, that no other politicians were to be trusted, that the courts were not the final word. I mean, geez, Warren, even was it an Emmy he lost for The Apprentice that he claimed voter fraud on. So, I mean, this is in a large, to a large degree, this shouldn't have been a surprise. What happened in that last month, and certainly the people around him and closest to him, I describe in the book, as a real failure of imagination to not anticipate and see where Trump was going with this.
You say that Giuliani was the only one who actually told him, though, that he should claim that he won.
Well, that's the only one I know of specifically or explicitly. And yeah, that was election night in the White House, in the residence, that, without any evidence and even questioned by the staff what evidence, he had to claim victory. Rudy said, well, you just go out there and say it, which is what Trump did. It was not scripted. There was nothing for him to read. Certainly, we can talk about his staff more. I mean, in a lot of ways, Trump wasn't well served either. But he had a lot of professionals working for him. There were, who had their own lines, and certainly claiming victory when there was no rationale or data points to back that up was something that most of the people did not want to go along with.
Given that there were professionals and people standing in the White House, what made him stay, do you think, after all that went on, not just at the very end, but during the administration itself, all of what appeared to be incompetence, whimsical behavior, really no sense of governance in the way that you would expect or hope elected officials would see it.
Yeah, I mean, so I should be clear. I mean, there were not there were a few people at the end telling Trump that he was wrong, that this was not a clear cut victory. I mean, who was telling him that he was wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's what kind of my point is. I mean, Ronna McDaniel to a degree, Mike Pence to a degree.
Ronna McDaniel's the chair of the Republican National Committee.
Yes, thank you. But what was happening was that, the day it was called, November 7th, when the election was called, Trump's top campaign attorney, his campaign manager, White House attorney came and sat in front of him and told him not that he'd lost, but that he had a chance of winning. There were recounts to be had. There were election challenges to be run down. As you well know, major networks and newswires like the Associated Press, this is no small thing. It is not a guess that someone's won. They're not calling it until they're absolutely sure. Yeah. But there were recounts to be had. There were close races. But what these folks told him was that he had a 5 to 10% chance of winning. Thinking, or what they told themselves was that if we tell the president, if we set his expectations low, then we can kind of get him to a concession, right? And if we tell him there's only 5 to 10% chance of winning, maybe that'll do it. Well, there was never a 5 to 10% chance of winning. Even one of the states, let alone trying to overturn 3 of them. And and what Trump hears, Trump was told back in 2015, when he hired Corey Lewandowski as his campaign manager, what his chances of winning were. Corey told him 5%, and he won. So
but he said 10%.
Yeah, it was a 5 to 10%. They negotiated that there, but the point being, like, a very small chance of winning, and he did, to the surprise of himself and others. But that's what I mean. There were not people telling the president specifically. I mean, I again, this has been out there a little bit, but I report that the only time I could find that Mike Pence was angry with Trump and told him he was wrong was a fight about Corey Lewandowski. In fact, a couple of years earlier, news reports that Pence's super PAC had hired Corey Lewandowski, and Trump was furious and gave Pence the silent treatment. Told Pence that it made him look weak. The Russia investigation was going on, so I guess this was 2017, and he thought it made him look like his own deputies were fleeing the ship and trying to latch on with other politicians. The truth was, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, had asked Pence to hire Corey. They were about to hire Brad Parscale as the campaign manager in 2020, and they wanted somewhere for Corey. Pence agreed, had a lunch with Trump. They talked it over. But by the time that news comes out a couple of months later, Trump had forgotten and accused Pence of betraying him. Well, that was a bridge too far for Pence, who yelled at Trump in the back of the presidential limousine that he needed to get his facts straight on this one. So fast forward to the end of 2020, Trump is pushing Pence to overturn the election results, to not to certify the elections in Congress. And people around Pence are telling him, Trump needs another get your facts straight moment. But that's not what Pence says. Pence and his team argue that he was very clear with Trump, that he didn't have the authority to do that. But what Pence was telling Trump was, Mr. President, anything your legal team gives me, I'll look at. But I don't think I have the authority to do what you're asking. Well, the president hears that first part, that Pence is willing to consider anything he puts in front of him. And when I interviewed the president down in Mar-a-Lago a couple of times, that's how Trump described those scenes to me, was that Pence never told him no, that Pence was always open to hearing his side of things. And, and that he was surprised on January 6th when Pence didn't go along.
General Milley also at some point had to tell Trump I think it was having to do with that incident that I mentioned earlier that had to do with the St. John's and the Bible and all of that.
Mhm.
He had to tell Trump what it meant to be the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as compared to the president. What did he tell him? What did he have to say?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on this book on this particular day. It's June
Yeah.
1st in
Yeah.
2020, which is where the debate starts internally over whether to send troops into major American cities where these
Right.
protests are happening. And Trump wants to do it. Trump wants, that was well reported at the time. What wasn't reported was that Trump was telling people behind closed doors that Milley was going to be in charge of this effort. And at this point, Milley and Trump got along quite well. Milley's a fascinating character. I think, as I was saying before, it really comes to life for in the first time in a lot of ways. In his role in the administration, at least, he was elevated under the Obama administration to chief of staff of the Army. He's a Ivy League grad, and he could go kind of into the weeds with Obama, into the back pages of the briefing books, and they'd both read them all and knew him back and forth and get into those details. But he's also kind of a Boston sports guy, and could engage with Trump kind of on that level. And he had a good relationship with Trump, and that's why Trump kept telling people, like, he liked Milley. He liked that, Trump has his fascination with his generals, my generals, and wanted to put Milley in charge because he liked him. But Milley had to keep telling Trump. First of all, Milley was very much against using the Insurrection Act to send uniformed soldiers, active duty soldiers into the U.S. Capitol streets. Milley understood the difference, between the National Guard, which is trained as a kind of quasi law enforcement, domestic, crowd control group, and active duty soldiers who are trained to kill and take land, and the danger that would present, in this sort of situation. But he also knew that he's not actually in charge of any troops. He's not in charge of any, he's the top general of the U.S. military. That's true. But as an advisor to the president, as an advisor to the Secretary of Defense, not in command control of any soldiers. And they got into a shouting match. As I described in the book, as it escalated as quickly as any argument between a New Yorker and a Bostonian ever has, and with more at stake, maybe than one ever had before. And finally, Milley had to turn to the room and say, I'm surrounded by attorneys here. Bill Barr, Pat Cipollone, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, Pat Cipollone, the Chief White House Counsel, others. I'm surrounded by lawyers here. Someone speak up. Tell them I'm right. Tell them this is what the Constitution says here. And finally, Bill Barr said, yeah, Mr. President, he's right. And there are a handful of scenes like this in the book. I mean, my the most striking one for me in reporting this was when I heard that same day about Milley pushing back on the Insurrection Act. And there's a debate swirling around the Oval Office, full of advisors, political advisors, as well as military, national security advisors. And Trump wants, Trump is acting like there's an insurrection underway in the country and in the Capitol. And Milley's seated right in front of the Resolute desk. In a very calm voice says, no, Mr. President, and points to the portrait of Abraham Lincoln hanging behind the president's shoulder. Says, no, Mr. President, that man, he had an insurrection. What we have is a protest.
It's a great story. Was there anybody in the White House, given the president's behavior, who suspected that in fact he might be something we would refer to use the only term I can think of is mentally ill?
Well, the 25th Amendment did come up, multiple times during the Trump administration, including inside the cabinet. And there were discussions at the end of his term and what had happened on January 6th around that. Is the kind of the best way that I can describe that. And I put in the book that there was never a discussion about implementing the 25th Amendment, but what was described to me in a couple of different ways is talk kind of around that. And, there was, in those first few days after January 6th, there was there was a lot of distance between Trump and the other Republican leaders in Washington, and then that sort of flipped on its head pretty quickly as well once those first polls started coming out to show Trump's base still had not, the Republican base still had not deserted him.
John Kelly apparently said at some point, I think he told you, that he hated working for Donald Trump. He was the chief of staff. Why did these people do that? Why were people who were capable of hating the job, who resented the way that the president dealt with them, who didn't think, in fact, that he was engaged in constructive policy or really governing the country at all? Why did they stick around?
It's a good question. Let me quickly. The John Kelly departure reminds me of another piece in a scene in the book, and it also involves Milley. I just want to share real quickly.
Sure.
It was when Milley is becoming right before Trump nominates him for the joint as chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Milley comes and meets with Kelly and Trump, and he's meeting with Kelly beforehand and some others, and says, Kelly tells him you're about to he's going to offer you the job. Mattis wants somebody else, but Trump wants you, so be ready for that. And Milley says, well, what would you do, John? And Kelly looks at him and says, I would get as far away from this effing place as I possibly could. And, Milley, Milley accepts the nomination. But the very next day, Kelly resigns. Now, why did he take the job? Why did he last as long as he did? These are good questions. I think that he needs to, and all these individual people need to answer for themselves. I mean, what I found was everyone had different reasons. It's hard to speak truth to power, right? It's hard to tell your boss that he's wrong or on the wrong path, right? No matter where you work, or almost no matter where you work, in almost any walk of life, and certainly any president, right? I mean, I don't know how many people were so eager to tell Obama or or Bush or Reagan that they were wrong or on the wrong path. But it's most, the examples are kind of most resonant and alarming with with President Trump in a lot of ways, and certainly no different on how difficult it is to say that. And I think what was most telling to me, and to answer your question this way, is Trump from day one. From inauguration day, his top priority is to win re-election. I mean, they start filing re-election paperwork hours after he's inaugurated in 2017. I would have a hard time coming up with a list of people, almost any people, who shared that top priority. To me, it seemed like everyone had their kind of priorities for working for Trump, working in the White House, right? Holding these powerful jobs, and put their sort of reservations or differences with Trump aside. I mean, Gary Cohn needs to be asked. His first economic advisor is again another scene in the book that Trump or Gary Cohn is furious. Raised Jewish in Cleveland and a longtime Wall Street executive in New York, furious with how Trump has handled Charlottesville. And tells Trump that he's so mad he might have to quit. Well, Gary doesn't quit. Gary sticks around to get his tax reform bill done and then leaves, right? I mean, Jared Kushner has a civil justice, some of his prison reform bills and the Middle East policies that he's pushing. Stephen Miller is very much obviously an immigration hawk. For all of the policies that Stephen Miller was behind on immigration, I'm not sure how hard he was pushing to get the wall built. That Trump's one top priority in immigration. If you force my hand, I would have to say kind of Steve Bannon was the only one that I was aware of that had a clear plan inside the White House of how to win re-election, which was to pass all of the bills, make all of Trump's campaign promises into law or executive order and run on that. I mean, Steve Bannon lasted 6 months, 7 months in the White House before he was, snowed under, an avalanche of, internal backbiting. So, I hope that answers your question. I think there were a lot of reasons that people had for taking the job with Trump and sticking around.
So some of them did have specific things that they wanted to accomplish. Others just wanted to be able to say they worked in the White House. But the circumstances must have been pretty difficult to deal with. And obviously the turnover was extraordinary.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was historic turnover, absolutely. And to say nothing of the positions that were just never filled, right? Yeah, it was a lot to deal with. I mean, there was everyone, and on my side of things, in the White House press corps, it seemed to me everyone kind of had their breaking point with Trump. And sure, some of it was politics. I'm not going to be naive about that. But it's a grind. I mean, aside from politics, Trump creates more news than anyone I've certainly seen in my lifetime. And that's why I used to tell my editors that covering Trump was like 3 days of news cycles packed into one, except that Wall Street Journal only paid me to cover one of them. But my thing was I was addicted to it. I mean, I couldn't step away. When quick story for you, when we in the 2016 election, there were 5 of us on the Republican team covering the Republican primary and then Trump. And usually, what happens, as you know, the campaign teams for national news organizations kind of go into the White House, or at least a handful of the people who had covered the winning presidential candidate go into the White House. So you have those sources that you can help the rest of the team, that sort of thing. When Trump won, I was the only one on the Wall Street Journal's White House campaign team that went into the White House, because everybody had already hit their breaking point. We were all adults with families, and some people didn't want to do that to their there was no predictability, right? And it was hard if you had little kids. It was I remember one colleague said that her teenage daughters cried at the dinner table when she told them very excitedly that the bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal had asked her personally to come cover the White House, the most, politically most important office in the world, for the Wall Street Journal, and her daughters, which brought tears to her daughters' eyes because of what they had seen their mom go through for the last year and a half on the campaign trail.
What did you document, or what do you feel that you've documented about the Trump White House that was, I don't know how to put this exactly, but the most inappropriate by comparison to other presidencies and to the expectations that people had prior to the Trump administration of what the presidency should be, what the White House should be like?
Yeah, boy, there's a number of ways to go with that answer. I mean, I would say, on one hand, every president uses the media as a punching bag, right? I mean, we have kind of journalists or lawyer, what is the phrase? Lower than lawyers when it comes to public opinion, and a lot of cases probably deserves that, but no one. I mean, the level of antagonism that Trump drove between he and the media, while at the same time thriving on the coverage he was receiving, and knowing that full well, that was no mistake. He, as much as he said he despised the media, all the fake news stuff, he was just as addicted to us, and he needed us just as much. I mean, certainly, there's well reported how much free earned media he earned in 2016. So I mean, that was always kind of the most striking. That was one thing that I never quite could quite come to terms with, was how what I saw from my end, him using us and his interactions with us. I mean, he was from a journalist access point of view, we had access to Trump almost around the clock. And I'm not talking about Twitter necessarily, which was a real gift to, in the terms of telling what was on his mind. But in the White House, I mean, I would run into him walking to the press office, which was unheard of for any previous president. I mean, just, and he would stop and talk. Those walks out to Marine One on the South Lawn became routine. I mean, no one ever did that. No one ever stopped to talk to the press like that before. And there was part of that was theater too, but for all of that, and that, to stop and talk to the media like that on the way to the helicopter where we'd ride to, out to the Midwest and hold a rally where he, screamed about the fake news for an hour and then got back in and would invite us up to the front cabin for Air Force One and have us watch, the Democratic debate, the presidential debate, and, give color commentary quite hilariously. But, I mean, it was a real, it was quite a job at compartmentalizing, I think, just put it mildly.
It sounds like it's utterly different to be with him 1 minute from the next.
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of see what you get when it comes to Donald Trump, or you get what you see. I mean, there's no, I don't think that's an act he's putting on. And that he's some sort of like hugely different person behind closed doors. I mean, but it's different degrees, right? I mean, one of the last scenes in the book is how he ends up in Mar-a-Lago, invites me to dinner after our interview, which is very clear so that I can see what a reception he gets when he goes onto the terrace at the dinner hour in his own private club, and everyone stands and applauds, right? And not unlike a rally. And he sits there in the middle of the terrace. His tables set up for two with rope, velvet ropes around it. And as people finish their dinner, they walk by and give him a encouragement, keep fighting, we believe in you, that sort of thing. Interrupting whoever he's speaking with, or he's eating, and Trump takes time for just about all of them. Did you have the chicken or the fish? Was it good? Was the waiter nice? Are they treating you well? I mean, he's in a very in a sense he's the ultimate concierge, which again is not totally dissimilar from what he does on stage. And when he speaks about polls and how much how he's at 100% approval in the Republican Party, which was not quite ever true, but as a way to reinforce to the people around him, to the people in the room, that they're in the right place, to make sure they're having a good experience, and to come back, and the ultimate for Trump, I think, is to leave and to tell someone, what a great time you had, and as in the same room with Donald Trump.
So the show never stops, and that what seems to be what life's all about.
I think that's right. I mean, I've had a bunch of questions about why he would sit for interviews with me or anyone else, any sort of fair journalist, when he's been talking about election fraud so much, right? And I think the answer is he came of age in politics along with Roger Stone, and the dirty trickster, working for Richard Nixon and then Ronald Reagan. And for people like Trump and Roger Stone, it's better to be, talked about and criticized than it is to be ignored and be thought of as boring.
Let me convey to you some of the questions that our audience has been asking. There are a lot of good questions here, and I may have waited too long. Paul wants to know this. This is pretty interesting. Why do you think that Kevin McCarthy and his colleagues are so afraid of the January 6th investigation?
It's a good question. I think we have a lot more to learn about what happened on January 6th. I think it's probably there may be a part of the answer to that question. Maybe that there may be things that they don't want us to know happened that day. I don't know that for sure, but certainly, it was a riot inside the Capitol. At the after a Donald Trump rally, right? I mean, there were and people who believed that the election had been stolen, believed that there had been widespread fraud because of what Trump had told them. And that's not a good story for That's not a good story for Donald Trump. That's not a good story for Republicans. That's not a good story for Kevin McCarthy if you're trying to win back the House, right? So I think that must play, some part in his reluctance. To give him his due, I mean, it would be political, I mean, we would probably learn some things, and some things would probably be blown out of proportion by the other side, as is the case, from time to time in Congress. But on the other hand, I mean, there are a lot of Republican leaders. I'll put it this way: there are a lot of Republican leaders in Washington who know that the big lie is exactly that, a big lie, that Trump did not win on November 3rd. But in the same breath, they think that, a lot of them think that Trump is onto something when it comes to using election security as a motivator for the base heading into 2022. If you notice a lot of Republican candidates talking about, the election being stolen, what they really mean is, if you press them a little bit, what they really mean is that, there should be, maybe election laws should not be changed so close to an election, right? Maybe there should be more voter ID in a more identification of people heading into the polling place. Maybe election day shouldn't last quite so long. Those are all very legitimate public policy debates to be had and to be decided. What they are not is election fraud. What they're not is the election being stolen. And that's where I think is, we're still in that dangerous place here. Where, you wonder, like, to what end that this will, this plays out if both sides, just continue to claim every electoral defeat as at the hands of fraud and abuse.
Boney wants to get very specific about one of those Shakespearean characters. What was Ivanka's actual role
in the White House?
I presume that's what it means.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that she played. It was not quite so well defined, right? I mean, she was not a particular. I mean, it's her title, right? Her title is senior advisor. So she could kind of come and go as she wanted, which, some people thought was a good thing. I mean, she did, she and Jared Kushner, and to give them their credit, they were successful from time to time, keeping Trump focused on, a particular task at hand. They could keep some of the, grifters, for lack of a better word, away from, the Oval Office from time to time. They did have some success at that. Ivanka played a key role in moments where Trump initially backed off of the criticized the send her back chance. I mean, he reversed himself a little while after that, but but she also, I mean, she clearly had her own agenda as well. And pushing some of the some family leave issues, and trying to, along with her husband, reach out to the other side of the aisle in a way that the president himself was never really all that interested in doing.
Edward wants to ask, and you could go back well before 2016 on this one. How culpable, that's his term, was the press in enabling Trump?
Oh, I mean, we we played a role just like in every other election. I think, culpable is a tough word, and a tough word to put to a newspaper journalist, a national political reporter at that. I think in a lot of ways, the state of our media institutions right now are, I mean, I kind of throw it back a little bit, and are driven by consumer demands, right? And places like the Wall Street Journal are still valued for the news pages of the Wall Street Journal so valued for playing it straight. And there's not that many places like that left, right? I mean, one of the scenes in the book I detail is about Hunter Biden, and some of the Trump apparatchiks come to me at the end of the race and want me to and pitch me on a Trump story, on a Hunter Biden story that becomes introduced me to for the first time to a man by the name of Tony Bobulinski, who becomes well known a few weeks later. But they want. I met with him for a while. I talked to him about his enterprise with Hunter Biden, and told all of them point blank, said this is a fascinating story. It really is. I mean, the under the hood look at kind of the embryonic stages of really some high stakes international business dealing between the world's two biggest economic superpowers, young ambitious men from China and America, but which would be a great story for the Wall Street Journal. I mean, it's a very interesting story for the Wall Street Journal. What it's not, I told them, what it's not is a smoking gun that Joe Biden did anything wrong. Do I know for sure that he didn't? No, but nothing that Tony Bobulinski had proved that. So if you want a story that, I told them, if that's what you're looking for, I'm not going to do that story, take it somewhere else. But to my surprise, they wanted me to even pursue any story related to this. And the reason why was that the Hunter Biden goings on had been only paid attention to by the conservative press, and in such a way that it became synonymous with conspiracy theories, to the point where no one in the mainstream media wanted to touch this Hunter Biden stuff. And their theory was if a mainstream media outlet thought of by both sides as fair, would say there's something here to look at, then maybe you go from there, right, and see what happens from there. But it was striking to me, to get back to your question, is that I looked around. There were very few places left that they could bring. If that's what you wanted, if you wanted some rigorous editing and reporting, and wanted a thorough, detailed story that was little other than the facts. I mean, other than the Wall Street Journal, there's very few places left, which really kind of drove home for me. And I think Americans elect kind of who at the end of the day, sort of who we deserve to a large degree. And the media plays a role in that. But I give whatever the state of media bias and is on a given year or given cycle, I do think that at the end of the day, the electorate sees through that and has a pretty good sense of their own instincts and votes for who they want instead of who the media is telling them to.
Of course, also the media are evolving, if I can put that in, and that's partly technological, and it's happening in a lot of different ways. Pat wants to know, and maybe you could throw in something about the front row Joes in this answer. Why do you think that Trump still has so many followers after the revelations in your book and other books as well? There's a lot of them.
It's a great question, and it's one of the questions I did not anticipate writing this book that question would be so resonant today. It would still be something we'd want to know. Almost a year, heading into a year after the 2020 election. And you mentioned the front row Joes. I would say it's one of the things I'm most proud of this book. There's been a lot of Trump books, right? I mean, over 30 years, you could fill a library with all of the books that have been written about Trump. Many of them by Trump himself. This year, I mean, my book came out the same day as another book. Another Trump book came out the very next week. What sets my book apart from anything to date, I think anything that we'll see the rest of the year, is that I tried to explain the phenomenon of Trump and what happened in 2020 through three ways. One is, we've talked quite a bit about tonight, is the sort of inside the room, fly on the wall reporting in the White House. I spent a lot of time under the hood of the $2 billion campaign, exclusive memos, text messages between senior officials to show some of the decisions or lack thereof that were being made along the way, and to explain how Trump could spend twice as much as he did in 2016 and still be scrambling really to chase Biden at the end. And then the third piece of this, and what I think is particularly unique is that I effectively embedded for 2 years with some of Trump's most loyal rally goers, the people who go to 40, 50, and again, I'm not hyperbolizing here. Some 60 rallies. I've been to 60 rallies, and to try to understand what it was about them as people, as Americans, that drew them to Trump and brought them back time and time again. And granted, this is a cross section of a subgroup of the Trump base. These are not, this is not the Proud Boys or some of those more militant groups. These are, they call themselves the Front Row Joes, and they were a lot of, there's about 1,000 of them, and they were, recently retired or close to being retired, with time on their hands. They were, maybe some of them never had kids or were estranged from their families. A lot of them were living paycheck to paycheck. Politically, a lot of them were Obama voters, drawn to the kind of charisma that Obama had in 2008 and 2012. And, and there was some policy overlap, right? I mean, at a very high level, Obama wanted to end the endless wars in the way that Trump wanted to end the endless wars, and thought that we had gone too far in some of our, adventurism overseas. But what ends up happening here is that they kind of form their own community and see each other at rallies. They start traveling together, staying at each other's houses, splitting hotel rooms on the road. In a sort of in a strange kind of way that Trump, who is very much a homebody, right? I mean, he would eat inside Trump Tower every day and shop inside Trump Tower and live inside Trump Tower, same way he did at the White House, right? 4 years in Washington, I think he had a meal outside the White House and outside of one of his own properties, I think one time. Didn't like to travel, always wanted to spend the night in his own bed. But in a lot of ways, Trump had made these people's lives bigger and richer, and gave them a community to be a part of. And I think what the book details that to a large degree, and also shows how the course of 2020, that a lot of these folks were led astray, right? I mean, I have a piece in here about tell the story of Randall Tom, who is a Minnesotan who's so sick in the summer that he's sure he has COVID. He can't move. He's bedridden. He's got to have neighbors bring over supplies. He refuses to go get any kind of medical treatment because he doesn't want to add to Trump's numbers. Not positive tests, not just positive tests, but any test at all. I mean, this was kind of the loyalty that Trump drew out of some people. Sandra Kaczynski from Michigan. I mean, I spent 2020 mostly in my bedroom, right? I mean, in my house, barely leaving. Sandra earns frequent flyer status on Delta because she's going to all the Trump events. She flies to Hong Kong with another Trump rally goer for a day to protest the extradition laws over there because Trump had opposed them. So they got on a plane, flew to, I mean, this wasn't 2020, but a little bit earlier, flew to Hong Kong for a day, marched in a parade, waved their Trump flag, got on a plane and flew back. So I have a handful of, anecdotes and stories from these people that, again, I try to, I spend a lot of time with to try to handle their stories in a very considerate and thoughtful way to not necessarily cast aspersions, but to understand, exactly what was going on here. And yes, it's prescient now. I mean, it's a pressing question now, not just for the country, but for the Republican Party itself. I mean, Trump drew thousands to Cleveland in June, thousands to Florida in July. We'll draw thousands more to the next rally. It would behoove us all to kind of understand what it was about Trump that he not only got 75 million people to vote for him, but still gets, even after January 6th, even after nearly 600 of his supporters have been arrested and for their involvement in January 6th, still draws thousands of people to his rallies.
Carol wants to know, do you think that Trump will ever be held legally accountable?
I don't know. It's a good question. We'll only kind of have to wait to see. I mean, they haven't had any success at anything like that yet, right? I mean, not necessarily on January 6th per se, but anywhere that the Democrats have thought that they kind of had Trump cornered on some legal issues for one reason or another, he's been able to to slide out from their grasp. And so does that trend continue? I don't know. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of action coming out of New York these days on some of his legal issues up there. But it will be interesting to watch some of these prosecutions and what comes out of some of these trials of the January 6th rally goers and supporters, to see what where the Justice Department, where prosecutors kind of
The case in Georgia too.
Yeah, exactly, to go with some of that information.
Yeah. Want to end on as happy a note as possible, and I think this is a great way to do it. Can you explain the title of your book?
Frankly, we didn't win this election. The inside story of how Trump lost. Yeah, definitely. I think this was from his speech on election night, November 3rd, 2:30 in the morning from the White House, where he's furious with his team. Actually, he eventually gets to furious. At first, he's described to me, and I report in the book, as it's kind of sad that he comes down from the White House. It comes down from the residence in the White House and kind of makes his way over to the East Room where he gives his speech. And there's an election night party there. The TVs are on still, even though everybody had went over to the East Room. And he stops at each TV as he walks to look one more time to see what the numbers were, if there's any more information, if the numbers that he had been hearing from his campaign earlier in the day, that he was going to win Georgia, that he was going to win Arizona, if any of that was finally bearing out on Fox News or CNN or any of those scenes, and then gets to the East Room and insists that there was good news from the night, that he is on the verge of winning that, and frankly, we did win that election. And what I like about the title is that it just captures everything I think about Trump, in that his willingness, and really 2020, and what kind of dooms him in the end, his willingness to impose his own reality on any given situation, whether it be in the business room or in the network screen rooms, or from the Oval Office, that it was he had so much success, really a good amount of success doing that throughout his life, and it finally comes back to bite him here. And I was a little bit I was a little bit nervous about the title. I thought it was I wanted the book to be a good read. I wanted to give people, like I mentioned earlier, I've written my fair share of Trump stories. I want to give people something, make it a fun read. I mean, I hesitate to use that word because 2020 for so many people, everyone really, was not a fun year. But I wanted to give my perspective, and I thought that the title was a little cheeky and might raise some eyebrows. I was also nervous about how it might come across and if it would confuse people. But I will say the book has done thankfully better than I had ever hoped. We're in our third printing right now. After just a month, we were sold out of Amazon on Amazon for a month after the book came out in mid-July. It's just been really, really nice to hear, to put the time and effort into this, and to ask my family to bear so much of my daily responsibilities that I couldn't do myself when I was doing this book, and for this to resonate so much has just been, it's been fun for me to watch how excited my wife and my mom and my sisters all are about it, and it's been really great.
Well, congratulations for that. I have to ask, though, given what it cost you, in terms of the embedding with the front row Joes and doing 3 stories a day and only getting paid for 1. What are you going to do now?
Thanks. I'm transitioning now to back to politics. I would much rather be out on the campaign trail and covering candidates and talking to people and voters about what they want and what their thoughts on the state of democracy and different candidates than I would be than I am kind of stuffed in the White House briefing room. Although the opposite was true for Trump. It was much more fun covering him in the administration, but fun or interesting, I should say, is the right word. But I have a story coming out next week on the Ohio Republican Senate primary, and about how that is kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to a sort of new battlefield inside the Republican Party. And we'll be diving in more to the to some of the similar dynamics from the progressives and moderates in the Democratic Party, which I think is a pretty underreported story in the political press right now. So excited to do some of that. But Warren, what the story is. I mean, I at the end of the day, I'm sure I'll just be covering Trump again. That's all anyone wants to know about. And
well, at least the fate of the world won't be at stake when you're doing it.
Yeah, just the Republican Party and maybe the Republican nomination in 2024, but we shall see.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. The book is Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost. The author is Michael Bender. Michael, great to talk with you. We'll be reading you in the Wall Street Journal as well as reading the book. And let me just say to all of our Jewish viewers, Happy New Year. The next program is not going to be next Wednesday, but next Thursday, and it's going to be Dennis Ross, Ambassador Dennis Ross, who was instrumental, or not instrumental, but who was very active for a very long time in dealing with the Middle East and dealing with Israel and the other countries in that community. Thank you so much for watching. Watch again, and Michael, thanks again to you.
Thank you so much. A real honor to be across the screen from you, Warren. Thank you so much.
Take care.